Every once in a while, an indie game shows up that sounds like it was designed by throwing darts at a genre board. Open world, Souls-like, deck builder, mythic folklore, emotional grief narrative. On paper, Death Howl feels like the kind of project that should collapse under the weight of its own ambition, and yet somehow it doesn't. Instead, it becomes something strangely cohesive, deeply atmospheric, and quietly memorable. Death Howl isn't just an experiment in genre fusion, it's a case study in how careful design restraint can turn conflicting ideas into a unified experience. The foundation of Death Howl wasn't mechanics or market trends, it was tone. The developers centered the game around grief, isolation, and endurance, not heroism or power fantasy. You play as Ro, a hunter wandering a desolate, myth inspired wilderness following the death of her son. The game never rushes to explain the details, never over explains motivations, and never tries to comfort the player. That emotional distance is intentional. Grief in Death Howl isn't loud, it's quiet, lingering, and unresolved, and the design philosophy flows directly from that idea. This is where the Souls like influence becomes clear, not through combat speed or punishing reflex test, but through world design and narrative delivery. Like classic Souls games, Death Howl tells its story through implication rather than exposition. Environments hint at what happened. Enemy design suggests broken histories. Lore exists, but it never interrupts the experience. The player is trusted to piece things together or simply sit with ambiguity. That trust in the player is one of the game's most important design pillars. However, the developers made a crucial decision early on. Traditional action combat wouldn't serve the emotional goals of the game. Fast twitch base fighting tends to create adrenaline and empowerment, which runs counter to the sense of vulnerability Death Howl is trying to evoke. Instead of asking players to react quickly, the game asks them to think carefully. That's where the deck builder system comes in, and it's not a gimmick. It's the core of how the game communicates tension. In Death Howl, cards are not abstract spells or flashy abilities. They are framed as ritual instincts, survival techniques, and learned behaviors. Each card represents preparation rather than raw power. Combat unfolds slowly, deliberately, and with weight. You draw your hand, observe enemy intent, and decide how much you're willing to risk now versus later. There's no button mashing, no split second dodging. Every action feels like a commitment, and that commitment mirrors the emotional journey of the protagonist. What makes the system work in a Souls like framework is how risk is handled. Instead of stamina bars or execution heavy mechanics, Death Howl uses resource exhaustion and deck depletion to create danger. Powerful cards often come with long term consequences. Overextending can leave you vulnerable in future turns or future encounters. Just like in a Souls game, failure doesn't usually feel cheap, it feels earned, the result of impatience or poor planning. The enemy didn't cheat you, you misjudged the situation. The open world structure of Death Howl reinforces this philosophy. This is not an open world filled with icons, quest logs, or constant distractions. It's open in the sense that paths branch, regions loop back on themselves, and the player is free to explore, but it's also deliberately sparse. There are long stretches without combat, long stretches where nothing happens except walking, listening, and observing. This emphasis is not a lack of content, it's a design choice meant to create space for reflection and tension. Level design borrows heavily from Souls like principles. Shortcuts unlock gradually, safe areas feel like relief rather than entitlement. The world folds back onto itself in subtle ways, rewarding attention rather than map checking. You're never explicitly told where to go, but the environment gently nudges you forward. When combat does occur, it feels meaningful because it interrupts the stillness. Each encounter feels like a deliberate test, not filler content. Enemy design plays a major role in making the deck builder system feel fair and engaging. Enemies in Death Howl clearly telegraph intent. You know when an enemy is preparing a heavy attack, reinforcing defenses, or setting up delayed damage. This transparency shifts the challenge away from surprise and toward judgment. You're not reacting to randomness, you're responding to information. The game punishes recklessness, not curiosity. Boss encounters elevate this idea even further. Bosses aren't about overwhelming you with numbers or unpredictable chaos. They're about endurance, adaptation, and understanding patterns. Boss fights feel like puzzles where deck composition, card timing, and long term planning matter more than brute force. Victory comes from patience and learning, not mechanical mastery. Progression in Death Howl is deliberately restrained, and this is one of its smartest design choices. You don't become exponentially stronger as the game goes on. Instead, you gain more options. New cards expand your tactical possibilities rather than inflating damage numbers. Equipment modifies how you approach situations instead of invalidating earlier strategies. Even healing remains limited, reinforcing the idea that survival is never guaranteed. This avoids one of the biggest pitfalls of deck building games: power creep. Death Howl never lets you feel invincible, and that's by design. You're not meant to dominate the world, you're meant to endure it. By keeping progression grounded, the game preserves its emotional tone all the way through the late game, preventing the mechanics from undermining the narrative. Visually and sonically, Death Howl commits fully to restraint. The color palette is muted and cold. Animation is minimal but purposeful. The user interface avoids clutter, keeping the focus on the world rather than systems. The soundtrack is sparse, often giving way to silence, wind, and ambient sound. When music does appear, it's subtle and unsettling rather than triumphant. The game never tries to hype you up, it keeps you uneasy. Even the card art reinforces the cohesion. Cards feel like relics or carvings rather than collectible power ups. They look worn, symbolic, and grounded in the game's mythic setting. This attention to aesthetic consistency is what makes the genre fusion work. Without it, the deck builder mechanics would feel detached. Instead, they feel like an organic extension of the world and the character inhabiting it. Ultimately, Death Howl succeeds because it knows exactly what it wants to be and refuses to compromise that vision. It doesn't chase trends or over explain itself. It trusts the player to engage thoughtfully, to sit with discomfort, and to learn through experience. It's a Souls-like that values contemplation over reflexes, a deck builder that values meaning over spectacle, and an open world that understands the power of silence. If you enjoyed this deep dive into how Death Howl was built, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any future uploads. And if you want to support the channel, check out my Patreon, where the latest exclusive is a full review of Resident Evil 4 and a look at how that game completely changed the direction of the franchise. As always, thanks for watching, and game on.